I'm Britt Clennett in Hong Kong and welcome to ViuTV News. Coming up on tonight's show. Lawmakers give Disney expansion funding requests the green light despite opposition. Death of woman from rare disease sparks calls for drug subsidies. And North Korea accuses the US of pushing Korean Peninsula to brink of war. And it seems hard to believe following stern opposition against the proposals, but today the Legislative Council approved the government's funding request to inject $5.45 billion into Disney's expansion plan in Hong Kong. The debate on the funding request had to be extended after lawmakers failed to put the request to a vote, even after the set 20-hour discussion period. In the end, the bill was passed with 30 votes for and 24 against. Those against the proposal say the government must renegotiate its deal with Disney, but Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development came out in defence of the bill.
We have gone through a lot of analysis, and also we have pushed very hard in the negotiation, and we believe that this package is really the best package that we could achieve.
Every time Disneyland demands something, we have to give in. We're not opposing the expansion plan, but we don't want to be threatened and treated like an ATM machine.
More money out of taxpayers' pockets. LegCo also approved a $6 billion funding request to invest in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. $1.2 billion of that lump sum will be the government's stake in the development bank, while the rest will be used as credit reserve. Some lawmakers questioned whether the government will actually be able to recoup the investment, while others say it's all just for the sake of showing face to the central government. One member of the Treasury Bureau made it clear the investment will have no return at all. The bill was eventually passed with a pro-establishment majority in the legislature. Desperate calls from patients with rare diseases for drug subsidies after a woman with an unusual genetic condition died because she couldn't afford the drugs. Stop killing patients, protesters shouted outside the government headquarters today. The members of a rare disease patients group, along with several lawmakers, were calling on the government to provide funding for Hong Kongers who suffer from rare medical conditions. They're asking to benefit from the same subsidies as those with more common diseases.
Medical costs for the drug is about $20,000 a month. And for an ordinary family, they cannot afford such expenses. So we need some subsidies from the government. And unfortunately, the subsidy hasn't come yet. So we're looking at patients dying while there is medication available to at least sustain their lives.
New People's Party lawmaker Regina Ip is backtracking on her own pledge of not joining the new administration. She now says she will actually consider joining Carrie Lam's new team after a meeting with the CE-elect. Ip visited Lam's office in Central today along with a few members of her own party. She refused to share details of their discussion but only said they've touched on some livelihood issues. She added she wouldn't nominate any of her party members to take office in the new administration because the party is, quote, not mature enough. Here's what she had to say about her own participation.
I consulted my party's Central Committee on the question of rejoining the Executive Council. Members are generally in favour, and I told Mrs. Lam that I would leave the matter in her hands. If she considers that I could be of service to her administration, I would actively consider. The issue is...
News elsewhere now, and North Korea has accused Washington of pushing the Korean Peninsula to the brink of nuclear war following yesterday's joint training drill. 2 US bombers from Guam flew over the Korean Peninsula on Monday as part of a training session alongside South Korea's Air Force. The move prompted outrage from Pyongyang. State media called it a nuclear bomb-dropping drill. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has courted controversy again, saying he'd be honoured to meet Kim Jong-un under the right circumstances, even as North Korea threatens to continue its nuclear weapons tests. The White House is defending President Donald Trump's decision to invite Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte to Washington, saying his cooperation is needed to counter North Korea, despite his alleged support for extrajudicial killings of drug suspects. Nathan Frendino has more.
Fighting back once again against criticism, the White House says its invitation to Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte comes down to unity over North Korea. North Korea test-fired a ballistic missile on Saturday and is vowing to continue the tests. White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus said on Sunday Trump's Duterte invite was to firm up support in Southeast Asia. Duterte, who came to power last year, is accused of supporting the extrajudicial killing of more than 9,000 drug suspects in his country. An issue UN Human Rights High Commissioner Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein says must be addressed directly by the White House.
Ambassador Nikki Haley has said that she'll make human rights a priority, so one hopes the messages will be very clear and undiluted from the President of the United States to the President of the Philippines.
But Duterte is not the only controversial figure being invited to the White House. Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, who heads the military government that took power in a 2014 coup, has also been asked and has reportedly accepted the invitation to meet President Trump.
Staying in the US, and documentary filmmaker Michael Moore is never one to shy away from controversy. This time, the Oscar winner is taking his political views to Broadway in the hope of bringing down Donald Trump. The one-man satirical show promises to take audiences on a ride through the United States of insanity. Moore, who won an Oscar for his gun violence film Bowling for Columbine, has been a vocal critic of Trump. 3 weeks before the presidential election, Moore released a documentary called Michael Moore in Trumpland.
His Achilles heel is his very, very, very thin skin. And so we need to have a sort of nonviolent comedy shiv, just that we insert ever so slightly under it. And hopefully that will discombobulate him enough to where he won't be able to think out or plan much of what he's hoping to do.
Thousands of people in Hungary took to the streets to voice their support for the European Union. EU flags were waved through central Budapest in a rally dubbed We Belong to Europe. The march was organised by Momentum, a so-called upstart political movement, which recently announced it would run in the country's parliamentary election next April. The group stand against what they view as Russia's creeping influence on the continent.
We're not greedy people. We're not like the government is saying. We'd like to remain European citizens and not a servant nation of a Russian region.
Meantime, more troubles for the British Prime Minister Theresa May as she struggles to fight off rumours about a frosty dinner discussion about Brexit with the EU leader. A German newspaper report revealing details of the London dinner last Wednesday claimed that EU President Jean-Claude Juncker was sceptical about May's suggestion that a deal could be reached quickly on citizens' rights. The Frankfurt Allgemeine also said he considered her overly optimistic about the divorce, given the complexities. May dismissed the report as Brussels gossip.
I have to say that from what I've seen of this account, I think it's Brussels gossip. And just look at what the European Commission themselves said immediately after the dinner took place, which was that the talks had been constructive. But it also shows that actually these negotiations are at times going to be tough.
Coming up next, the latest from the world of business. Well, it's been a mixed day of trading as we find ourselves sandwiched between two public holidays. This also accounted for the lull in trading. Investors were cautious as they weighed up China manufacturing data that found growth slowed to its weakest pace in 7 months as domestic and export demand faltered. The Hang Seng Index ended up 0.3% at 24,696. Bell International jumped 16%, its biggest single session surge in at least 10 years, on news of a company buyout. Revenue at the gambling hub of Macau rose 16% in April as new resorts helped draw both high rollers and casual gamblers. And the number of mainland tourists visiting Hong Kong during the mini Golden Week holiday hit a 5-year high. According to the Immigration Department, around 620,000 tourists flocked to the city from April 29 to May the 1st. 490,000 of them were mainland visitors. This marks an increase of as much as 3.7% compared with the last few years.